Good evening. I'm Keith Collar. I'm the Associate Dean for Planning and Outreach here at the Graduate School of Education, and I want to welcome you all to the first Ask With Forum of the new academic year. Thanks so much for being here. We're glad you're here, and we thank you for taking some time to be part of our event tonight. As a lot of you know, the Ask With Forums are public lectures that bring leading voices from the field here to the Ed School for an active dialogue with our community. Many thanks to our speakers tonight. I know we're all looking forward to learning more about their work. We have a number of exciting Ask With Forums planned for this year. Please check our website for upcoming events. Love to see you here for some of the things we have coming up. I want to thank my colleagues, Tricia Brown, Jody Smith-Bennett, and Amber Di Natale for all their work in the planning and coordination of the forum series. Also, a number of our Ask With Forum speakers are interviewed in our EdCast series, which is hosted by my colleague, Matt Weber. So we encourage you to check those out as well. We're very pleased to have with us this evening the Harvard Graduate School of Education Alumni Council. I want to thank them for all the great things that they do for our school. And I'd like to introduce the co-chairs, Ellie Laughlin and Will Makers, to come up and introduce tonight's speakers. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed tonight's forum. I hope we'll see you at future events.
Thank you very much, Keith, and welcome to all of you tonight from the Alumni Council. The Alumni Council serves as your representatives to the community and helping connect both what we do here at the Harvard Graduate School of Education for important work in the classroom and then out into our lives. So it's a wonderful time for us to be back here together. And Co-Chair Ellie Laughlin and I want to thank you for coming and enjoy the evening.
We're really excited about our speakers this evening, so I'm going to introduce three of them, and then they will come up, and please collect your questions because they're especially looking forward to hearing from you and answering some questions from you. The first speaker is Carnell Chosa. He received his master's here in 1996, and he is co-founder and co-director of the Leadership Institute at the Santa Fe Indian School. Carnell is from the Pueblo of Jemez. He received his BA in sociology modified with Native American Studies and a minor in education from Dartmouth College, yay Dartmouth, and his master's from the Harvard Graduate School of Education. Mr. Chosa is co-founder and co-director of the Leadership Institute at the Santa Fe Indian School, a community and leadership development project for New Mexico's Native American population through innovative projects and programming, including the Summer Policy Academy and the Pueblo PhD cohort. He was a founding board member of the Walatoa Charter High School in Jemez Pueblo and currently serves as board member to the Chamisa Foundation, Santa Fe International Folk Art Market, Global Center for Cultural Entrepreneurship, and the Wheelwright Museum. Mr. Chosa is also an advisory member on the Native American Advised Fund at the Santa Fe Community Foundation. Given all of that, I'm amazed you found time to be here. Regis Pecos is his co-founder and co-director at the Leadership Institute and Summer Policy Academy at the Santa Fe Indian School. He was born and raised on the Cochiti Pueblo Reservation. He is co-founder and director and co-director of the Leadership Institute and the Summer Policy Academy. He is a graduate of Bernalillo High School. He has served several terms as lieutenant governor and is a member of the Cochito Pueblo Tribal Council. He received his undergraduate degree from Princeton in 1977 and is completing his doctoral work at UC Berkeley. He is the longest-serving executive director of the former Office of Indian Affairs, now the Department of Indian Affairs. He served under 4 Republican and Democratic governors. He is currently the Chief of Staff to the New Mexico Office of the Speaker of the House in the New Mexico House of Representatives. Regis is also a senior advisor to Harvard University's John F. Kennedy's School of Government's Honoring Nations program and a senior advisor to the Udall Center for Studies in Public Policy, Nations Institute at the University of Arizona. He is a former member of the Board of Trustees at Princeton and the former chairman of the Board of Trustees at the Santa Fe Indian School, a post he held for nearly 12 years. In 2001, Regis received New Mexico's highest award as a distinguished public servant. Patricia Sandoval is the Director of Planning and Evaluation at the Santa Fe Indian School. She is from the Pueblo of Laguna. She holds 2 BS degrees in biology and education, a master's in educational leadership. She is completing her doctorate in American Indian Education Leadership from New Mexico State University. Ms. Sandoval taught for many years as a science teacher. She transitioned into administration as the first principal of the Walatoa Charter High School in Jemez Pueblo, New Mexico. She is currently the Director of Planning and Evaluation for the Santa Fe Indian School and leads the school's strategic planning process. Other initiatives include partnership in the First Pueblo doctoral cohort and development of Laguna Pueblo's Charter High School. Thank you so much for being here.
Good evening. Thank you for the welcome and introduction. It's good to be here and to see familiar faces. I'd like to start this evening with an introduction of a good friend of mine who's a colleague here at the Kennedy School, a student here at the Kennedy School, Mr. Alvin Warren. I'd like to invite him respectfully to come up and provide a blessing. And in our communities, we for important meetings and important gatherings, we always like to start, with a blessing, and I'd, respectfully like to ask if we can do that this evening. Alvin is from Santa Clara Pueblo, and we met actually at Dartmouth College. Even though we're both from New Mexico, we met in college, and he's very, very important person in our communities. He's served as lieutenant governor for his pueblo and tribal interpreter, and most recently was the cabinet secretary for the New Mexico Department of Indian Affairs. Thank you, Alvin. So I'm using a presentation. I learned it this past weekend, and I'm really excited about it. Part of what I do is I like to write out my speech and read through it, but there'll be imagery above. It was important for us to provide a full picture of our communities and who we are and where we come from. So our presentation will be in 3 parts. I'll do the first part, and my piece is really providing just a background on Pueblo community, who we are, and also the programming that we've created as part of the Leadership Institute. Regis will follow up with he's an incredible speaker, presentation on philosophy, history, and the policies associated with our work. And Patricia will move into really how she, in her role at the Santa Fe Indian School, she's implementing the work of the Leadership Institute to advance, our work with young people and with community members. So it's a lot of information. We each have about 12 minutes, and we're just excited to share our work. And please ask questions. We'll have time for questions after each of our presentations. So I'm going to start with my time here at the Ed School. This was 95, 96, and I had an advisor, Professor Michael Nuckola, and he, was an incredible person. My first meeting with him, though, he scared me a little bit. I got into his office, and he asked me, before he asked anything else, he said, "Who are you, and what do you bring to the table?" And I think I found out later that he asked a lot of students that question, but for me it was a heavy question because I really hadn't answered that for myself. So I just wanted to provide some imagery of our community members and the people that we work with, all Pueblo people. So while at the Ed School, I began to explore these 2 questions really, and it actually made me switch from the teaching and learning program into risk and prevention. So I felt, I needed to dive into actually what I needed to do to find out who I was and what I needed to do to contribute to my community. And a lot of it was led by and guided by Bell Hooks, who I just love, and her teaching to transgress, and really finding out about self-actualization and using that with the work I do today. This is home. This is my mom up top. She's an incredible person. She's a veteran, a single mother, and she's also really reviving the art of piki bread making in our communities. It's an old art form of making bread it's the bread used in ceremony. And so, I just wanted to share a little bit of that. Parent number 2 and parent number 3 are my grandparents, Lupe and Guadalupe Chosa, and I didn't realize I was wearing the same shirt in 2 pictures, 2 different times. But they're very, very, very important people. They were contributors, they were farmers, they were really community activists in their own way. My grandmother actually was really vocal in kind of the political side of things, and my grandfather was active he was the oldest medicine man in our community, and so he was very active in healing people and helping people. This is New Mexico. There are 22 tribes in New Mexico. 19 of them are Pueblo communities, and they're situated along the Rio Grande River. If you see that blue, the river, that's our 19 Pueblos are within that area. We have 5 language groups, and you'll see the names Tewa, Keres, Tiwa, Zuni, and Toa. Alvin is from Santa Clara, and they speak Tewa, and there are 6 Pueblos that share that language. Patricia and Regis are from Laguna and Cochiti, respectfully, and they share the Keres language. I'm from Jemez, and Toa is our language, and we're the only community that speaks that language, and these languages are these communities are the ones that speak these languages in the world. I mean, so for Jemez Pueblo, our population is 3,500. There are 3,500 people that speak Toa, and that's it. And it's an oral language. It's not written. And so, I'm proud to say that there are Pueblo communities that still have that language intact. We're starting to notice our young children not speaking it as much, but it just, kind of shows how important language is and in our communities. These are old photos of Jemez Pueblo. The top one is my community. The one to the right is Cochiti Pueblo, that's Regis's community, and the one below is Laguna Pueblo, Patricia's community, and it's really beautiful when you take a look at how, all of it is just so natural. The adobe, the mud, the wood, and the rocks, and it was a beautiful time back, when these photos were taken. I think the most beautiful part about growing up Pueblo in our communities was to be raised, in this environment with the really powerful core values of commitment, of perseverance, of language, of giving back, and of education, really. And so, we're raised to really think about getting and furthering our education, but also coming back home with it to contribute to our communities. So this is kind of my education path from Jemez, which was rich in cultural education. Then I went to high school at the Santa Fe Indian School, where we're housed now and where I work. But there was a little gap between those two. I didn't, at that time, due to, I think, 100 years of federal policies, and I didn't get, and our students didn't get, that blend of providing our cultural education within a school system. So there was this little gap for me at that time, and when I went to Dartmouth, I noticed that struggle for me. There was a struggle. It was when you're in a lecture hall or in a class and you're the only Native student and you're asked, well, what's the Native perspective? I didn't have an answer. Or why is it important to save the Toa language? I didn't have an answer. I really didn't. It was a tough time. But when I came to the Ed School, and I was asked that question, who are you and what do you bring to the table? It really sparked that need to answer that question. and the need to formulate a plan. So upon graduation, I moved back home and was wondering, besides tortillas and chili and tamales, what we bring to the table. I was fortunate to have met up with Regis at the Office of Indian Affairs, and we had the same vision. It was just a great time to connect and to work for him and really just start creatively developing what we need to do to do the work. And so we designed and conceived the Leadership Institute. And the way we did it was we did a community scan. We looked at our communities. We looked at what are our strengths, what are our resources, and really what are our needs. And we figured we needed to develop a plan that was really comprehensive. We actually sought the advice of a professor here, Professor Colt at the Kennedy School. We flew him out to New Mexico along with Professor Carnell from Arizona State University, or University of Arizona, and they recommended this convener think tank approach to our work. And so we coupled that with my grandfather and his father's advice in infusing, our cultural traditions and our core values into this new organization. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the project, the Leadership Institute, and as you see, or as I talk about the projects, keep in mind our purpose, and our purpose was, really to build a consciousness about community issues, to develop a networking system within our communities, to strengthen intergenerational relationships for that transference of knowledge, and then to provide enrichment opportunities for our young people. So this is the Leadership Institute, the umbrella to our project. And I'm gonna go over the about 10 different programs, and then Regis will follow up with more information on this. We're a small staff. We just hired our first undergraduate intern last week. And I'm gonna read this because if I don't, I think I'll end up talking a lot longer than I should. So the first program we developed under the umbrella was the Community Institutes, using a 2-day curriculum grounded in storytelling, learning about years of federal policy and its impacts, and engaging in core values conversation. We bring 40 diverse New Mexico Native folks together to talk about and provide recommendations on our most pressing issues. We've had over 45 institutes with over 3,000 participants. And this picture here is of an institute we had in September, and we were fortunate to have a very special guest participant, Justice Sonia Sotomayor, as part of our institute. So that was a special time. We invited really kind of the thought leaders in our communities to participate in this event. We have a project called the Summer Policy Academy, or SPA. It's a 4-year summer program. In year 1, we take 25 students from throughout the state and introduce them to tribal, state, federal, and international issues. We use as faculty all the individuals that have participated in the Community Institute. So now we have, a resource of 3,000 people that we can pull in to teach our young people. In year 2, through a partnership with the Woodrow Wilson School, we take 16 of the 25 students to Princeton University, where they focus on national policy. And in 4 teams of 4 students, they develop position papers related to different topics like health, language. This past summer was VAWA, violence against women. And then we take those position papers down to Washington, D.C. and present it to our congressional delegation. It's a very powerful exchange. Year 3, we place our students in internships with those community institutes, faculty. And year 4, we're developing an international piece. We're engaging in research, evaluation, and program development. We've titled it Youth Attitudes, and we really want to find out what youth attitudes are on these different topics. So our first one is on youth attitudes and language preservation. We'd like to do one on youth attitudes and core values, youth attitudes and language. So it's really engaging them in really formulating plans and research. We have a project called the Senior Honors Project. We co-designed this, and at the Santa Fe Indian School, our seniors spend the year researching topics important to them. So they spend the whole year, they choose a topic, they do their research, and at the end of the year, they present their findings to our tribal leaders, to their parents, to the school community. This is now the exit exam for the students, for the seniors. We have a new project that we're piloting called Brave Girls. It's a girls' leadership development program, and it's run by one of our staff members, and it's been a really incredible experience for our young girls. They've been referred to participate in the program, but now we have girls, wanting to volunteer and participate on their own. And we have a project called AIR, American Indian Higher Education Resources. This is a web-based project that we've created so that we are able to provide resources to our Summer Policy Academy students. We're working on developing a college tour kind of project so that our students who are in college can do a tour of their campus and provide it on the web, and also a mentoring system on the website, as well as scholarship information. Recently, in April, we produced the Pueblo Convocation. The Pueblo Convocation was to be a culminating effort to the community institutes. So we looked back at the 12 plus years of institutes and pulled out 10 really critical areas that our communities face. And we identified 2 individuals per topic, and they spent the year researching that and provided a state of the state in Pueblo communities at this April convocation. And we had 400 participants, and we had to cap it at that. One of the things now we're doing is following up and doing community convocations per Pueblo. So the institutes didn't end, it just kind of transformed into something else. These are the 10 topics that were identified as kind of the most critical right now in our communities. And the presentations were presented in these areas. Our new project, one of our new project and an outcome of the convocation is to begin to think about how we support communities and innovative programs in these 10 areas. We're developing a model now of giving, supporting programs, a philanthropic model, I guess, to support communities within those 10 areas, and really a way to internalize the work that we're engaged in. Our newest project, and finally the Pueblo PhD cohort, started as a concept last August and went on a fast track. I like to say that it was inspired partly by the innovation here at the Ed School and the new doctoral program, the 3-year program. And so we contacted and partnered with Arizona State University's School of Social Transformation, and they adopted our 10 areas. And through support and funding from the Kellogg Foundation, we will begin our first cohort of Pueblo PhD students next month. And they'll be allowed to receive, well, they'll be working towards a PhD in Justice Studies with the ability to concentrate in any one of those 10 areas or a combination of. And so, these are just some of the projects that we've created and that we're working on. Those aren't our cohort members, but those are the young people that we work for. They're actually from my Pueblo, and they danced for Justice Sotomayor when she visited. But I wanted to just give a little landscape, share a little bit about our work and how it all comes together. And I'm gonna hand this over to Regis. He's gonna share a little bit more about the history of our work and the history of our communities. Thank you.
In the tradition of my pueblo of Cochiti people, I want to give respect and honor to all of you by first expressing the honor and respect in my language. Guatsi Hopa is a greeting whenever we cross our paths in our community with others. Guatsi Hopa Sewat Yumit is a recognition of our brothers. Guatsi Hopa Sea Mehmet Yami is a recognition to the women folks. Guatsi Hopa Uha Marstan is a recognition of all of our relatives. And usually when we greet one another in this way, the response is Rawa Guatsi Hopa Uha Marstan. Hu'a. Thank you is usually our response to be blessed in our presence. And so I give you honor and respect in that way. Where we've been, where we are, and where we're going is a central theme to our Leadership Institute. And always we reflect upon the past to appreciate the lessons of those experiences, to define our response to the challenges we face, to make sense of how we move forward. The challenges that we face today in our respective indigenous communities have some very deep roots in the history of impositions by a number of sovereigns. Spain, Mexico, and more recently, the United States. There is a long history of impositions that you are well aware of to some degree. But in order to appreciate how we respond to these challenges, it's necessary for me to provide a context for understanding and appreciating what we're doing today. And I want to help you understand the deep connections that one sometimes results in some very emotional responses to these challenges. In all of our songs, in all of our ceremonies, we are taught that you all can appreciate the teaching, the phrase, remember where you come from. And it's not a teaching to talk about remembering where you come from physically. It is a teaching that is deeper in our connection, that defines a way of life and our collective responsibility in contributing to sustain what we call the gift to us by our Creator. And those gifts are represented by land, upon which exist many places of worship that sustain our sense of spirituality. There is the gift of language that is essential in understanding and providing for a meaningful way your place in all of humanity. There is the gift of a way of life that dominant society defines as religion. But what our elders remind us is a way of life. And there is the gift of a traditional governance system that helps to guide our relationships. And there is the gift of our own jurisprudence, the tools to be used as the Creator intended when we are in conflict with one another, that these tools be used to restore one another, to keep us in balance to maintain the harmony of the spirit of community. And the Creator also gave us the gift of family. As we listen to the voice of this child, it's the place that this child learns how to love, how to respect, how to have compassion for others. In our teachings, in all of our settings, elders remind us always that a child in this spirit is welcome to be part of this discourse, because in the spirit of that child, the child is absorbing these teachings. And so we appreciate the presence of the youngest spirit among us today. And there is the gift of community. All of you are members of your respective communities. And it is through the community that we are able to learn and appreciate our core values that guide our relations. And the Creator also gave us the gift of resources that include all living beings, that is part of a mutual interdependence for the maintenance and sustenance of our lives. But since the time of creation, as we talk and learn about origin and about emergence and about creation, when the Creator gave us these gifts, the Creator also gave us this circle that contains our core values about love and about respect and about compassion and about understanding and about service and about integrity and about forgiveness, that help to bring to life the relationship with the gifts of the Creator. And the Creator also gave us the gift of a way of life and gave us a ceremonial calendar that moves in cycles from fall to spring to summer to fall. And in this kind of circular, repetitive process is an engagement of reaffirmation of our core values related to our connections to the gift of our Creator. But our forefathers, in prophetic ways, shared long ago that in our journey through life, that there will be many challenges to our core values and our connections to the gift. And these would be the challenge of our commitment to those gifts. And it has come through the presence and the pathways and crossways of these three sovereigns. Spain, the first confrontation and threats resulted in a now classic example in history of resistance, of the Pueblo Revolt in 1680, when our forefathers responded to the threats to these core values and the gifts of the Creator. Mexico and our experience in this pathway resulted in the great debates of whether or not indigenous people were even human beings in this world. But our experience more directly with the United States, the most powerful country, a nation in this world, is where I want to begin. Because the long history represented in this display of policies and laws deliberately conceived, first with the doctrines of discovery, later with the doctrine and the principles of manifest destiny, that all of these ways that was this country and this government conceived to deal with what they called the Indian problem, through genocide, through extermination, through termination, to removals, to relocation. It's what more recently the United Nations defined as the tragedies and the crimes against humanity. Not somewhere else in this world, but right here among and against the indigenous people they found it in what is now the United States of America. And so, in our work, we are trying to undo the colonization of hundreds of years and impositions that have made our systems and our institutions that otherwise nurture these core values, that we might contribute in meaningful ways to its life, its spirit, contributing to the sustainability of their place as we ask profound questions like, what will future generations inherit from us? And so as we move through understanding the effects of these impositions on our lands, on our language, on a way of life, on governance, on jurisprudence, on the dismantling of the family, on the reorganization of our communities, the exploitation of the resources, we try to make sense of the way in which all of these drive us, if we're not mindful of the past experiences, away from our core values. So from the extreme ways in which this federal pendulum swings back and forth, it is articulated best by a legal scholar, Felix Cohen, when he said that there is not another group of people in this country that have been more affected by policies conceived to destroy a group of people than have the American Indians. And like the American Indians, they serve symbolically like the miner's canary that tests the poisonous gases that is reflective upon the democratic faith of these United States of America. And so our work has been to examine, to understand how to unload this baggage that creates for the ways in which our communities are moving away from our core values, that is directly affecting our well-being, when in the beginning the gifts of the creators through our core values and connections had everything to do with a way of life defining the maintenance of our well-being mentally, physically, and spiritually. What a beautiful gift given to us that is our responsibility to sustain so that future generations might inherit all that we have come to appreciate in the beauty of the realization of what it means to be a human being, what it means to be a person whose life is about giving and being in the service of others, that they might reap the beauty of the life of that spirit. And so in the 1970s, President Nixon outlined a new policy that history will define in time as a period of self-determination. But in this time that is now 40 plus years old, this act that is recognizing that Indian people, indigenous people, must decide what is best for them, to end the arrogance and the paternalistic attitudes that government knows best what's good for us. That in this long process of impositions, it has sometimes led us to hate ourselves and who we are and who we were. And education has been a central piece of that agenda, beginning with the creation of the assimilation policy in 1890 that gave rise to boarding schools, that took little children from families and their communities, when the mantra was the way you kill a culture is to take the children from that culture and deny those children their culture. And for 100 plus years, that has been the agenda of education that we have embraced even in this time of self-determination, that when we were finally given the opportunity to take control of our destiny, that we were not conscious to ask as we accessed resources in the creation of Head Start programs in our own communities this question: where is Head Start a Head Start to? If not an earlier acquisition of English at the expense of what? The gift of the Creator in our mother tongue. So now, without conscious thought, we embrace Head Start in our own schools, in our own communities, and subject our own children unconsciously to a process that began in 1890 to assimilate us, to eventually become visible in this society. And that is just one layer. But as we move forward in our examination and in our work, we come to recognize that in this first 30 years of self-determination, the long history of conditioning of our people have simply resulted the change of this color of people with this face of our people replacing the dominant white face that represented everything that was critical prior to self-determination that our forefathers were critical of, because they challenged and threatened the very gifts of our core values and the connection to our Creator. So now is a time that when our systems and institutions are so fragile that we must be fully conscious in asking the kinds of questions to thoughtfully answer the question of what will future generations inherit from us? Will they honor us because we rose to the occasion in the same way that we honor our forefathers who rose to protect, to sustain our inheritance, demonstrated and epitomized by the Pueblo Revolt? Or will the children of future generations look upon this time when we failed them, and their discussion about these connections is but a remote remnant of what used to be, that in the next generation they vaguely know of this connection, and in the next generation the norm is that this never was. And so the work of the leadership with all of these multiple initiatives is a convener of people to create a critical nucleus in the beginning, to examine where we've been, where we are, and how we respond to answer the question of what will future generations inherit from us, in ways that has helped to create a critical mass of conscious thinkers deeply rooted and connected to the core values and to the gifts of the Creator. That is our work today. And in the initiatives that we have now been blessed to create, we are asking these important questions. Are the decisions we are making today in this time of self-determination supporting our core values? Or are the decisions we make and are making today contributing to taking us further away from our core values? And if they are, it would be the ultimate irony that in this time of self-determination, we have contributed unconsciously to our own demise, fulfilling the prophetic prophecies of our forefathers, that if we are not mindful of our collective past experiences, to use them as lessons at some point in our journey of our people, that we would become our own worst enemies. So the work we do is largely driven with that understanding and that commitment, that in the course of being educated, that our young people would be deeply rooted in these teachings and the core values, so that no matter where they go, as it has happened to us, as the experience of our Native brothers and sisters here today ultimately face, as all indigenous people and peoples of color face, And that is when you come to institutions like Harvard, like Princeton, like Dartmouth, two things inevitably happen. Either you come and you are reminded in these institutions of how deeply you're blessed to come with these core values and these connections, or you make the mistake in your vulnerability that you begin to compare yourself with others that results in devaluing who you are and what you bring. And so as we work in this process, we've been deeply blessed with recognizing the teachings of Carnell's father, my late father, to be deeply blessed that in this time, true to the prayers of our grandmothers, our grandfathers, that there will be a time for our people that we will be blessed with young people from our communities to eventually strike the elusive epiphany of combining the rich blessings of a cultural education with a formal education that contributes to sustaining the gifts of the Creator. That's what we've been blessed with, and that is what is at the heart and the soul of the work that we do. And we are honored to share this because coming here, we're grateful to the Alumni Council because it is a process for us of validation. It is a process for us and others here, the affirmation that those gifts given to us long ago still have a place in our lives today, as they always will, because that's who we are as Indigenous peoples. And no matter what the greatest power in this world could have done, the spirit of rising to every challenge on every occasion is that deep commitment to the core values and to the gifts of the Creator. Thank you.
Show me which way to read this. Good evening. Goatsi Hopa. I always hate following Regis. And I'm having problems moving this forward. Keeps going to the, oh, there you go. There you go. Pueblo girls that were taken away from their homes. This is actually at Carlisle. This was actually at Santa Fe Indian School in 1910, I believe. Santa Fe Indian School, as Regis said, was one of those schools that was created to assimilate, acculturate the Native American students among the 19 and the natives in the Southwest. The conversation that we have as part of the Leadership Institute is that now that we're in charge, Santa Fe Indian School was actually it was the first school that was contracted under Public Law 93-638, the Indian Self-Determination Act. It was contracted by the All Indian Pueblo Council because back then one of our leaders said if we don't control the lives of our people unless we control the education. So that was the purpose for that. But now it's a conversation is about, well, who will lead our reemergence? And it's a big responsibility now that we're handing over to our children, the children in Pueblo country. Santa Fe Indian School is also a tribally controlled school. In 1984, Santa Fe Indian School, through the Education Amendment Act of Public Law 100-297, became a tribally controlled school. What that means is that Santa Fe Indian School was now given over to the 19 Pueblo governors and said, okay, it's your school now, you decide what you're gonna do with it. So how do we now move forward from those 30 years when we were still following the same paradigm? You come to Santa Fe Indian School and it was like any other school. It was not our curriculum. But how do we get to that point now where we can actually design a curriculum and what do we base it on? Santa Fe Indian School is a 7 through 12 program. As Carnell said, we have about 650 students. They're day students and they reside in the dormitory as well. And so we have a residential program, but it actually represents, I believe, a 180 shift from the past. I'm following my cards also, because like Carnell, I'm gonna get lost here. And actually in 2001, one of the last laws that President Clinton signed into act was the Santa Fe Indian School Act, signed into legislation. And what he did was he gave 114 acres of land right in Santa Fe to be held in trust for the 19 Pueblo governors of New Mexico. So there's a little reservation right in the middle of Santa Fe, and that's Santa Fe Indian School. That's actually we're actually a new building, very new institution, new buildings. And that was actually a little corn patch that was planted right there, so we didn't Photoshop that in. Our partners, very early on, as Carnell said, what I've been doing is I've been heading the strategic planning process at Santa Fe Indian School. Very early on in our process, we aligned ourselves with the Leadership Institute for the very reasons that Carnell and Regis have been speaking about. We needed to begin to have the conversation with our students and our staff about the very things that the core values, the gifts from the Creator. How do we then now infuse this in a curriculum? So one of the first things that we did was we had stakeholder retreats. And as is common, and as Carnell spoke about earlier, we went to our people to get their input and to get their advice. This is a picture that was taken, and it's actually of our staff, our remarkable staff, and our students at Santa Fe Indian School as we went through this process of gathering data and collecting information from all of our stakeholders. This is a retreat that we held for our parents and our community members, and always it was about the conversation, but always it was grounded in the conversation of the Leadership Institute. What are our core values, and how is an institution like a high school, middle school reflecting those core values? But also, how do we begin to now infuse these 10 elements, these gifts of the Creator were just discussed, governance and tribal law, health, education? How do we incorporate those into a curriculum? Students were active throughout this whole process, and in fact, the young men that you see there spent a whole Saturday with us one day, gave up their Saturday, and the result of that was our school vision, which is to be the leader in Indian education, and individual stakeholder mission statements. The bottom picture there is our alum. We brought our alum together also so that we could solicit their advice on how do we move forward. The outcome of all of that was the request for a more culturally congruent and responsive curriculum to our students. This very, very busy visual is something that we created that actually shares our process. Back in 2009, we began, very, very top up there, began with all of the stakeholder retreats. It led us then to develop our mission, our vision statement, but it also identified for us specific areas of focus, 19 specific areas of focus, 19 specific areas of need. At Santa Fe Indian School, if you're going to be the leader in Indian education, you must address these 19 areas. So we've been plowing our way through that right now. And I think the thing that's most remarkable about this is that there was a very strong call for a stronger school culture, values, personalized education, personalized instruction. What does that look like? You'll see this posted all over our campus as a reminder that this is an ongoing process. This is also our core value tree. Because as we're moving forward also in our strategic planning process, it was an opportunity for us all to engage in the conversation about what are our core values at Santa Fe Indian School. And if they are indeed our core values, what do they actually look like? So that if someone came onto the campus at Santa Fe Indian School, they could see, I see that respect is here on this campus. This is what it looks like. And it really required that all of us, staff, Carnell and I were both in a facilitated discussion about what are our 3 top core values, and they were respect, caring, and giving back. What did they look like? We did a lot of work around that so that we could clarify for ourselves, this is what these mean to us as staff, as students at Santa Fe Indian School. At Santa Fe Indian School then, what we're focusing on is something called our ideal graduate. If you go into any Native American school, I guarantee you that the mission, the vision is going to say, we want our students to be productive, we want them to know what's going on in their community, we want them to contribute. So how do you do that then? What that was the perfect segue into this is how we're going to do it. Hold on a second, I got to catch up, moving way ahead of my... By taking the ideal graduate then and operationalizing our program, this is what we've been able to do. We've been able to infuse the curriculum that was identified and outlined by the Leadership Institute, those core values, and those 10 elements. And we've identified those as something that we've called Pueblo epistemology. And in fact, the cohort that Carnell spoke about that we've developed with Arizona State University is actually based on Pueblo epistemology that came right out of the work of the Leadership Institute. So the curriculum now then allows us to bring into the conversation the gifts of the Creator, those 10 elements identified. And also, it allows us to engage in the critical consciousness brought forth by the 100 years timeline. At the beginning of the school year this year, we began like we've never begun school before. We actually began by hosting the Pueblo Convocation on our campus for our staff and for our students so that we could ground them all in the same messaging. And I think one of the biggest contributions of the Leadership Institute is the continual reinforcing and the grounding us all in the same message. Because as we implement this curriculum and we put it in place for our students, the convocations that they host, they put that same message out to the larger community. The curriculum that we're designing also puts the same message in for our high school and our middle school students. These convocations that are now going to be hosted in the communities bring that same message. And it's about building consciousness across all generations, as Carnell spoke about earlier, but also to build capacity at all the different levels so that we can all, we believe, move forward together. And it really is an evolution of the Pueblo people when you begin to think about what is it that we're critically looking at and thinking about. Because if we don't think about those very things that Regis was addressing, then we are lost as a community. And the only place that you can go right now is you have to go to the high schools. You have to go to the middle schools. It has to be the same message. And so the Pueblo cohort is the way that we now build capacity, because I can't get all of these 650 students ready if there's no one there to receive them. That Pueblo cohort is so powerful in that they're engaged in the same conversation. It's okay, we're ready for you. We're ready for you now. The convocations in the community prepare the people so that all of us then are engaging in these same conversations about what are our core values and are the decisions that we're making moving us away or toward. We just discussed it this morning. Problem solving is one of our SMART goals. Well, you have to have a problem solving around the core values. With the students, it's that decision that you just made to use a substance moving you away or toward your core values. Those are the types of conversations that we need to have with our students and that we're engaged in right now. So our ideal grad, it's extremely significant. The three of us have all been away to university, where in many areas we were the only Native American there. And we were called upon to represent. What do you feel? Asked to speak on behalf of all Native people in the United States, and many of us were not ready to engage in that conversation, like Carnell said. And so why is this so important for our children? Why is it important that they be engaged in these conversations at middle school and high school? Because when they go out to the universities like Harvard and someone asks them, what do you feel about this issue? They can speak and they can say, this is what I feel. This is what I know as a Pueblo person about these very important issues in my community. They can not only identify them, but they can speak to them, and they can talk about the importance of those issues as we move forward to maintain the Pueblo culture and the Pueblo way of life. Thank you. That's it. Your gift.
Okay, we'll turn it.
Turn it off now.
So we're going to take some questions, and we'll sit up here on stage, and there's microphones on both sides. Please ask us questions. I know it was a lot of information, but we'll be available for questions for about 10 minutes. Questions.
We can keep talking. You see that we don't have a problem talking. This is my water.
Yep. Great.
There's-
Go ahead.
I think this is.
Do you want one?
Hi, my name's Judy Pace. Thank you so much for being here. So I'm curious about your curriculum, and if you could tell us a little bit about what it actually looks like, it would be great to hear how you're putting all these ideas into practice through the curriculum.
That's a really good question. Thank you for that. Because it's a work in progress right now. As Regis and I were talking about earlier, we've been talking about we do have to follow all of the federal legislation. So now there's the Common Core state standards. But as we've been moving through the whole strategic planning process, we are actually holding ourselves to a greater level of accountability than we've ever held ourselves before in the past. So now we've created SMART goals for ourselves. Our SMART goals are actually problem-solving SMART goals. So what we're doing right now is we're actually looking at the Common Core standards. The Common Core standards, I'm sure y'all educators, you all know about, they're actually problem-solving standards. So what we're asking all of our teachers to do from the 7 through the 12 are to look at these specific 10 elements that we've identified. And Carnell and Regis can go through them again, but we're looking at governance, which is so important to us, indigenous law, health, community and tribal resources, environment, health, education, family and community. Art, and I'm missing one. I always forget one. I always manage to get through 9 and I forget the 10th one. It's probably education.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. But what we're asking our teachers to do is to actually address these elements in their curriculum. And we're actually asking them to come together and work in multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary teams, so that if you took a concept like agriculture, which is like seemingly simple, right? It's actually not, because there's a lot of issues around policy regarding agriculture, the use of the water. and the science of agriculture, the science of indigenous farming, and so it's a very complex. So what it's really requiring is our teachers to really talk and collaborate and discuss like they've never done before. We also created something that we're calling an Essential Understandings document, and I shamelessly took it from Montana. If there's any Montana people, you have that Education for All, and it's Essential Understandings. But what we did with that was we also prepared it for all of our teachers so that they could begin to see how these core values actually go back to our emergence and the significance and why it's so important that we reflect core values in our curriculum. It's kind of like a character counts for Indian kids. So.
You know, one of the really important parts in this whole process, as we're moving in redefining education for the first time for our purposes, consistent with our core values, it necessarily forces us to rethink the whole policy framework so that we know that we have to become architects of our own policies. So legislatively changing where it's necessary the statutory parameters that are totally incompatible with our vision of education is a necessary part of going where we must to totally redefine education for our purposes. And if it has to be done legislatively, here's one point, is that states are provided the opportunity, one, to seek waivers from No Child Left Behind. Taking that principle and that concept, we are now conceptualizing approaches of how we take that principle and change the statutory parameters that is confining and incompatible with the full and comprehensive implementation of this new articulated vision that we know and we feel that it is necessary, that we do the necessary statutory changes to fully have the complexibility to bring the kind of community-based education into a formal educational foundation and framework. I mean, these are necessary steps as we're moving forward. That is an important part of the discourse. You had a question, I thought.
Just too excited to hear you guys speak. When you're talking about the, could you talk more about the culture, from the time that a child starts school and how that whole thing, you talked about from the 7th grade up, but from the kids from kindergarten and how you deal with culture with them until they get to the 7th grade?
I think it's you can sit down. I see that you're so tall and you're having to.
Thank you.
You know, it actually varies from tribe to tribe. 19 pueblos in New Mexico, the Navajo and the Apache, and it really does. Culture is actually something that I think, always believed is something that belongs with the family, with the community, so that school is not really the place to teach culture. And in fact, that's kind of the distinction that we're trying to make right now. Most of our teachers are non-native teachers. In the elementary schools, most of them are from their community. They're native people from the community. But when you get to high school, because of the requirements that you have to have your degree in that content area, a lot of our teachers are non-native teachers. And when you say culturally congruent, culturally responsive, the first thing they do is culture. Well, how do I teach culture? I don't know how to do that. So what we're trying to do with these 10 elements is that they're culturally relevant. They're culturally congruent, but they have nothing to do with culture. That's not your place to teach my kids culture. I will do that. I'm a native person at this school. I have native resources. We will reinforce the culture, but you create culturally congruent, relevant, responsive. And by addressing these 10 elements, you are indeed doing that, because you are empowering that student then to go back into their community to fulfill that ideal graduate. Go back into their community empowered on these 10 elements. That's culturally relevant and responsive curriculum. Leave the culture to us.
Hi, my name is Tim. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
My name is Tim Argetsinger. I'm from I'm Inupiaq from the Northwest Arctic in Alaska. My question, I guess I find myself struggling with this in some of my own work, is it's the chicken or the egg situation in terms of what's the role of that schooling plays or can play in addressing some of the common social challenges that we face. And I'm really impressed that your institute seems to be coming at community health and well-being from a number of different angles, but I was hoping you could speak more to what's the role that schooling plays in, I guess, achieving optimal health and wellness for our peoples. I guess you have a very specific situation, but I'm just how, we talk about schooling and kids being able to have a better standard of living and all that stuff, but where does the dimension come in with like community engagement and dealing with some of those other issues? Thanks.
But that's really a fundamental part of the movement. It is the long history of impositions really have resulted in us totally conceding, because of the long history of conditioning as a process, that somebody else knows best what's good for us. And always in the public education process, it has always been an either-or question. That if you're going to be successful, leave behind your language and your culture and tradition, because in this process, there's no room for that. There's no value by the larger society of what otherwise defines who you are. So central and fundamental to this whole movement is really breaking the barriers where the community becomes an essential part of school, no different than following the traditional course of education of infusing, and all of these lessons, lifelong lessons, becomes permeated throughout. And schools have largely drawn the line that parents, community leaders, cultural leaders have no place in the confines of the four walls of this institution. So part of reaching our most desirable future is really consciously knowing that there are those barriers that we must overcome, that is about a conscious engagement of community. So that part of the community-based program approach is really having our students appreciate that those who never leave our communities, who might speak broken English, is as valuable as the person in this classroom who carries credentials. So that an important part of this consciousness is for us who have been educated in these formal institutions to validate and affirm for those parents, for those community leaders, for those cultural leaders, that there is a place of those core values and those cultural connections in this redefinition of the vision, finally, for our purposes, that breaks down those barriers where the two become part of a single complementing effort in finally striking the balance that in our language of the Pueblo people of Cochiti, there is a word, shkawa, that means the dual existence or the coexistence. My grandfather, who passed on at 99 years of age, blind most of his life, to me was incredible. I always wondered how he could see far beyond this place as a blind person. But he always talked about valuing all that defines who we are as indigenous people, valuing language and culture and traditions, but also given equal value to the development of skills in this formal educational process as a way to shield and insulate and sustain the spirit of those gifts of the Creator. That's a very fundamental part of the movement, and I thank you for that question.
Hi, good evening. Thank you so much for this wonderful panel. My name is Karen Mapp. I'm a faculty member here. And I have a question because I listened to what you've said with both promise and, I must admit, as an African-American female with some pain, because without the benefit, and I use that word in quotes, of a self-determination policy, I'm wondering how other peoples of color in this country can grab their education and insert their values into it. And I'm thinking about, first of all, what's happened in Arizona with the Mexican education program that they were trying to put into the curriculum, and now books like, Pedagogy of the Oppressed are banned. I think about sessions I've gone to in New Orleans where African American people are talking about how their culture of jazz and music has been stripped from the schools. So what advice or what words of wisdom can you give to people who also would love to go through this process of having their values and their history in schools, but without the benefit of some kind of policy that gives them some kind of power to make those choices? Thank you.
One of the things absent in this larger public discourse, last night at the Center for Public Leadership, I talked about the core values paradigm. And if we took some time this evening and went from person to person and asked each one of you to share openly and honestly a core value that drives you and your passion for what you've done in your lives to this point, and share with us who was your teacher. Because that part of the discourse, as a larger family and community in this United States of America, allows or does not create the opportunity to build and recognize and appreciate common ground. That if we gave ourselves the opportunity to share our core values in a consciously defined discourse, in this case about education and our collective well-being, that in my work using the core values and understanding and appreciating that no matter what complex issue you face, that if you begin a discussion about the common core values, it takes you into a different course of understanding and appreciating the mutual interest and concerns and benefits derived from starting at a point of a common agenda. When you don't start there, it takes you onto a whole nother course that is most always divisive and protective and selfish about the non-recognition that there is something deeper that we share if we gave ourselves the opportunity. And as we ask each one of you to think consciously about a core value that drives what you do and defines who you are, think about who that teacher was in your life. And all of a sudden it strikes the consciousness that that becomes the basis of your approach in living and challenging yourself to live with a set of core values that frees you from the shackles of being imprisoned with a sense of narrow-mindedness and selfishness without ever consciously achieving the most beautiful gift in all of humanity, and that is to, one, share the beauty of what it truly means to share with one another, to be able to strike the kind of relationships as that is defined and moved with a deep sense of love and respect and compassion for one another. Because that is an absent part of the discourse, we never give ourselves, children, most importantly, the opportunity to ever discuss shared core values that would guide their lives and their relationships. It's really sadly unfortunate that we don't make that a conscious part of any discourse in policy discussions.
I think we have time for one
more? Okay.
One more.
I'm Evangeline Harris Stefanakis. I want to thank you for opening the session with a blessing and with us having the opportunity to hear your native language and hear the depth of how that is how you enter your conversation in any setting. I guess I want to ask, in your schooling and in your cultural efforts now to build leaders, how are you thinking about preserving language, and how will that language that you all speak and are able to share be brought into that conversation of your program across the boards?
Yeah. We've always thought that, just like culture, that language belonged to the community. It was the responsibility of the community to build language. But now, as we're in education and we see that more and more our younger students don't speak the language, we actually at Santa Fe Indian School, we have several language programs in place right now. We've got a Kiwa, that's the Santo Domingo Pueblo. We've got a revitalization course. We've also got Kiwa is the maintenance course, and Kiwa Kochiri is the revitalization course. We also have the Navajo language that we teach during the academic day, during the after-school program, through our 21st Century funding, which is now gone. But through that, we maintain the kind of the culture and the language classes as part of the residential program. As part of the Dormitory Compliance Act, we are required to offer courses, so we do offer language and culture courses. But we're also applying for an A&A grant because we, as an Indian school, we really do feel now that it is our accountability and our responsibility to teach language. Right now, we still have the Spanish language. That's the credentialing language as part of the New Mexico state requirements. The Kiwa course and the Navajo course are fulfilling that requirement now. But in order to do this, we really need to certify more language speakers. So that's kind of the direction we're looking at with the A&A grant. It's not only to provide language as part of the day, but also to work with the state and with the communities to certify language teachers so that we can have it infused throughout the academic day.
At the community level, taking from the lessons of other indigenous peoples around the world, like the Maori, in my community, we have articulated a vision putting language at the center of our agenda. So it's resulted in creating language nests for infants 0 to 3, and then we have redefined Head Start. Instead of English, teaching our native language, and then sequentially moving to language development at the primary levels in elementary, mid-school, high school, and then within the larger community for tribal employees, for community members, so that everyone is engaged in the learning of language, and for those of us who are speakers of the native language to realize that the most precious gift we can give to other members of our community become language teachers in all contextual settings, so that the entire community is consciously engaged in language learning and language teaching.
I think that's it.
I think we're out of time. But I wanted to do, well, first of all, just to say thank you for having us and having us share our work. I want to invite Will up. I think there's a PowerPoint of the last picture. This is a piece of pottery designed and made by one of our faculty, Robert Tenorio. He's a world-renowned potter, and he created this for the Ed School, and he called it his graduation pot. So he infused, and all of his the paints are from plants. And spinach, black is usually the spinach, and then there's micaceous inside, a mica inside representing the New Mexico symbol with a hand. And I just wanted to provide this or give this to the Ed School, through the Alumni Council as a thank you for having Pueblo people here and being able to share our work. And I know Regis wants to describe a little bit more about the piece, and we have some seeds inside, and Regis will describe the significance of that.
Sure. It's an honor to receive this. Thank you.
Thank you.
One of the things that we wanted to do was to provide some meaningful, symbolic expression of our gratitude, because appreciation and gratitude is one of those core values. And in this pot is a symbol that is called the Zia symbol, with the 4 rays that reflect the seasons, that reflect the cycles of life, that reflect shared core values. But it contributes in this symbolic way the maintenance of a healthy mind, body, and spirit. And in this pot are kernels of corn of different colors. Because in the Pueblo philosophy, we're taught that grounded, this is what we use to pray. As we wake and have thoughts about the teachings of the core values, prayer becomes a process of verbalizing and articulating the reminders that during the course of the day we ask for guidance to live by the core values, to share with all who cross our paths during the course of the day. And at the end of the day, before we retire, we pray again to reflect upon how well we fulfilled our responsibility in living the core values. And so we thought that symbolically it would be an appropriate gift, because in this pot are the seeds, and we're taught that as long as we are the keepers of these seeds, that we would never perish as a people. And as long as we are the protectors of the gift of our mother corn, and use in prayer to express our faith and to maintain our sense of spirituality, we will never starve physically, nor will we ever starve spiritually. And so, symbolically, there are people from all walks of life who come to learn and share in an experience. And we thought that it would be appropriate to honor the Alumni Council for your incredible generosity, for what you create in the way of opportunities that we might enjoy the sharing of our commonness, of our core values, and that this symbolic gift full of seeds might always be a reminder that this is what can sustain the spirit of the vision of education, that I hope that as more people come here representing all walks of life, that we in fact can make the core values discussion part of our discourse to define our collective vision for what education means in the maintenance of the spirit as a larger family and community of this nation and of this world. So,
thank you so much.
Kept all the seeds. And I think to appropriately close the session, we've asked Regis if he'd provide the closing prayer. As we started, we'd like to the closing blessing as well in his language of Charis.